At Starbound, we tell stories the human way, not with artificial voices or AI slop. In the end, what's HFY without humanity? Subscribe to keep it this way. My name's Shane. Let's begin. The plasma injector's hum was a familiar song, a deep thrum that vibrated through the deck plates and into the soles of Nate Romero's boots. As a senior mechanic for Kessler Station, Nate knew the rhythm of every engine type that docked, and the freighter, the Matriarchs, was no exception. He worked by feel, tweaking a diagnostic sensor here, tightening a conduit clamp there with grease-stained hands, each motion instinctual. The air in the engine bay was thick with the heat from the coolant lines and the faint, musky odor of the ship's engineer. "Hold the pressure steady, Ramu," Nate said to the Groovek engineer, his voice calm and even, carrying just above the injector's purr. He was leaning deep into the maintenance housing, the collar of his jumpsuit pulled down to combat the bay's stifling heat. The motion exposed the back of his neck and shoulders, where the skin was a mottled patchwork of pink and peeling white. A low, gravelly chuckle echoed in the bay. "Fragile mammal," Ramu rumbled. The Groovek engineer was a tower of muscle and faded green scales. His hide had a leathery texture, and chips marred the points of the bony crest running down his spine. He tapped a thick, clawed finger against his own forearm, producing a dry, clicking sound like knocking stones together. "A little light and you'll fall apart. My hatchlings have tougher skin." Nate eased himself from the housing and wiped a smear of coolant from his cheek with the back of his hand. He grinned at his friend. "This is strategic regeneration. Out with the old, in with the new. You ought to try it sometime. Might brighten up that gloomy green of yours." Ramu snorted, a puff of warm, dry air. "My green is the color of a job well done. What were you doing? Trying to stare down a star?" "Shore leave," Nate said, stretching his back with a groan. "Went to Ridian 5. They have real beaches. Sand, water, the works." "And a star that tries to cook you alive, apparently," Ramu said. He gave what passed for a Groovek smile, the corners of his large golden eyes crinkling. "We get all light in sensible doses filtered through a nice thick atmosphere. Or better yet, a station viewport." He finished his work on the pressure regulator, the numbers on his console glowing a steady, reassuring green. "There, stable. Now you get back to your shedding." Nate rolled his shoulders and winced as the fabric of his jumpsuit scraped against the tender skin. "I think I just need a new coat of paint, that's all." The joke ran for 3 days, ever since Nate had returned from his brief vacation. Soaking up a distant star's light, even if it hurt a little, was a piece of home for humans, a comfort that defied easy explanation. It was a reminder of sun-drenched afternoons. The pain was temporary, so he laughed. Ramu rumbled, and the Matriarch's heart beat on. In Kessler Station's primary cantina, the gravity well, a dozen languages blended with the clatter of mugs and the sizzle of a nearby grill. The air was a blend of a dozen aromas: the sweet, yeasty scent of Groovek grog, the sharp citrus tang of Avorian energy gel, the sharp crackle from a Siginian's personal energy field, and underneath it all, the ever-present smell of fried food. Nate breathed it in. It was the smell of a crossroads, of a place where stories from every corner of the charted galaxy came to rest for a while. He sat at a small circular table with Ramu and a younger Groovek, Chi-Chi. She was an apprentice trader, her scales a vibrant green that shimmered with hints of blue and gold in the bar's dim lighting. She scanned the room, her golden eyes wide and bright, her small frame vibrating with a restless energy. She had joined their table with a polite but unyielding insistence. Ramu took a long pull from his mug of frothing grog. "And then the human says," he announced to Chi-Chi, gesturing to Nate with his mug, "that he needs a new coat of paint, as if he's a bulkhead, not a living creature." Chi-Chi tilted her head, her frilled neck spines twitching.
Is that what you call the healing process? Repainting?
It's a joke, hatchling, Ramu said, patting her shoulder with a heavy hand. Humans have all sorts of strange phrases. You should hear the ones he uses for malfunctioning engine parts.
Nate smiled and sipped his beer, a passable synthetic brew that was among the few human-friendly options on tap. We have to get creative. Things break in more ways than there are words for broken. Chi-Chi watched, her focus absolute, as if cataloging every detail. She leaned forward, tapping her claws on the tabletop.
How long did you spend exposed to the star's light to cause such a reaction?
She asked, her voice a quick, melodic chirp. Nate shrugged. I don't know, a few hours maybe. I fell asleep on the beach.
A few hours,
she repeated. She narrowed her eyes slightly.
And the light was direct, unfiltered.
As direct as it gets, Nate confirmed. Blue skies, sunshine, the whole package.
In the healing, how long will it take for your skin to fully repair?
She pressed on. A week? Maybe a little longer for the tenderness to go away. It's no big deal. It happens. Ramu chuckled.
It happens to him. Sensible, well-scaled folk like us have the good sense to avoid it.
Chi-Chi seemed oblivious to Ramu. She stared at Nate with the look of a mathematician who had just stumbled upon an equation that defies logic.
Fascinating,
she whispered, more to herself than anyone else at the table. Nate shifted in his seat. Questions about being human, from his diet to his sleep cycle, were familiar. But Chi-Chi's intensity was something new. She was examining a data point. He took another sip of his beer, but the taste soured. Chi-Chi's private quarters were small, Spartan, and meticulously organized. She stacked data wafers in neat piles, their edges perfectly aligned. She had charted her trade manifests and cargo schedules on a holographic display that pulsed in the room's center. She trusted data more than instinct. Data was raw, objective, and purely factual. The human mechanic's words echoed in her mind. A few hours. Direct exposure. The result was a mild temporary inconvenience. It was an inconsistency, a loose thread she had to pull. She sat at her terminal and accessed the station's public database, a vast repository of information shared among the 100+ species that frequented Kessler. She keyed in commands on the holographic interface with speed and certainty. First, she pulled up the stellar data for the Ridian system. The star Ridian Prime was a stable K-type orange dwarf. Its radiation output was well within standard tolerance levels for most carbon-based life. A burn from that star, while possible for a soft-skinned species, was understandable. But then she remembered Nate's file. Homeworld Earth. Star System. The Terran Star. She paused, her fingers hovering over the interface. The Terran Star. The name was a faint echo from a comparative xenobiology course she'd taken as a hatchling. It lay in a sector of space most considered unremarkable, the galaxy's quiet fringe that had minimal traffic. She typed the Terran Star into the search field. The data streamed onto her screen, a flood of numbers and charts. Stellar classification G2V, a yellow dwarf. She cross-referenced its spectral analysis, luminosity, and particle emissions. Next, she opened another window. The standardized biological hazard index used by every major species in the Galactic Compact. It was a simple, color-coded chart that correlated stellar radiation types and intensities with their effects on living tissue. Green was safe, yellow was cautionary, orange required shielding, red was a lethal exposure zone. She dragged the data from the Terran Star into the Hazard Index application. She gasped. She ran the query twice more, checking for errors in the database or her own input. The results repeated. The average ultraviolet radiation output of a G2V class star at a distance of 1 astronomical unit, the distance of Earth from the Terran Star, placed it deep into the red zone. This held true for the Groovex dense, leathery scales and for almost every other species on the chart.
The ambient UV levels on a typical beach on this planet, Earth, were beyond hazardous. The compact classified them as a sterilizing agent, an environment where ambient UV levels should, by all known models, scour complex cellular life into non-existence before the planet could turn once on its axis. Air caught in her throat. It had to be a mistake. Perhaps Earth had a unique atmospheric filter, one more powerful than any known planetary shield. She dug deeper, pulling up the geological and atmospheric surveys of Earth. Standard nitrogen-oxygen mix. A robust magnetosphere, yes, with an effect insufficient to mitigate the level of constant high-energy bombardment. She found a small, heavily annotated subfile in the human biological entry. The subfile contained terms she had to look up: melanocytes, eumelanin production, DNA self-repair mechanisms. She read about a biological process that actively absorbed and dissipated ultraviolet radiation, a cellular machinery that could identify, excise, and replace damaged genetic code with high fidelity. Their defense against the radiation was internal. They had evolved a tolerance, built into their genetic structure, that allowed them to thrive in a lethal environment, so comfortable in it that they considered basking in its unfiltered energies a form of recreation. Chi-Chi leaned back in her chair, her vibrant scales seeming to pale in the screen's light. She looked at the image of a sun-drenched beach on Earth, filled with humans lying on the sand. An image of leisure, of peace. And all she could see was a world death-bathed. She looked at the data again, at the terrifying red bars on the chart, and whispered the only words that made sense.
That's a death zone.
The next day, the engine bay's hum seemed to grate on Chi-Chi's senses. The heat from the plasma conduits pressed in on her, a pale imitation of the stellar furnace that had forged the creature standing before her. Nate was elbow deep in a coolant recycling unit, humming a tuneless, off-key melody. He looked up as she approached, a friendly smile on his face. "Chi-Chi, come to learn the fine art of flushing a particle filter?" She was silent. She held up her data wafer with a slightly trembling hand. The screen displayed the evidence. The Terran star's radiation output graphed against the biological hazard index. A stark white line representing human tolerance ran blithely through a sea of crimson.
Is this correct?
She asked. Her voice was a dry rasp. Nate looked from her face to the screen, his smile fading. He wiped his hands on a rag, his movements slow and deliberate. The numbers and charts were clear, but he recognized the look in her eyes. It was the same stunned expression he'd seen on spacers who'd survived a catastrophic hull breach. A mix of terror and awe. He felt a sickening lurch, the kind that came just before a bulkhead failed. This was about more than peeling skin. The quiet life he had built on Kessler felt fragile. He let out a long, slow breath. He could only confirm it. The data was the data. "Yeah," he said, as he spoke with a weariness that went deeper than a long shift. "Yeah, that's about right." Chi-Chi processed his confirmation. Her frills flattened against her neck. The friendly, fragile mammal she studied vanished. In his place stood a creature forged in a crucible of unimaginable intensity. The gulf opened between them, a sudden chasm, and his own foreignness struck him. Chi-Chi found Ramu in the mess hall, a frantic drumming in her chest.
Ramu,
She said, her voice tight.
we need to talk.
He looked up, crunching down on a particularly plump grub.
If it's about the cargo manifest for the Cetus shipment, I already told you. The weight distribution is off. You traders always try to squeeze in one more crate.
It's not about the shipment.
She slid the data wafer onto the table in front of him, the hazard chart still glowing on its screen.
It's about Nate.
Ramu glanced at the screen, then back at his food.
The Sunburn. Hatchling, are you still pestering him about that? Let the mammal shed in peace.
Just look.
She insisted, her voice sharp. Her claw trembled as she pointed toward the screen.
That red area is the lethal radiation zone for our species. For almost every species. That white line, that's the recorded tolerance for a human.
Ramu paused, a grub halfway to his mouth. He looked at the chart again, his focus lingering this time. He squinted, tracing the lines with his claw. The label for the Terran star, the star of Nate's homeworld, and its output levels registered. His smile faltered, his expression shifting to confusion.
This is a simulation,
he asked, his voice quiet.
It's public data from the Galactic Compact Stellar Survey, Chi-Chi said. It's accurate.
Ramu set the grub down. He stared at the screen for a full minute, the mess hall's noisy clatter fading into a distant hum. He remembered Nate, complaining about the tender skin on his back. He recalled his own jokes, calling him a fragile mammal. He had laughed at a creature who napped in an environment that would boil his own blood. The memory of the joke burned with ignorance. A subtle shift began as the story spread, its source initially obscure. Ramu, in his stunned silence, mentioned it to another Gruvek on the dock crew. That dock worker, while loading cargo, mentioned it to a hulking, ammonia-breathing pilot. The pilot, waiting for clearance in the traffic control lounge, brought it up in a hushed conversation with a lithe Chakrel, its upper limbs gesturing while the lower pair steadied its personal slate. The joke about a sunburn became something else. It became a piece of lore, a startling, frightening fact whispered in corridors and shared over drinks. The human mechanic, the one from a death world, who treats a sterilization bath of radiation like a pleasant afternoon. The whispers twisted and grew with each telling. Some claimed humans regenerated. Others said their blood could neutralize radiation. Still others whispered they were the descendants of beings who had tamed a vengeful star. The change was subtle. Aliens would nod respectfully, but quickly look away. Ramu provided the clearest measure of the new distance between them. When Nate reached for a tool, Ramu would have it waiting for him, his movements quick and deferential. The friendly insults gave way to quiet, formal questions about Nate's well-being. Is the temperature comfortable for you, Nate? Do you require a radiation shield for this task, Nate? In the mess hall, a space would always open up around him. Beings would nod respectfully as he passed, their expressions a mixture of apprehension and awe. Conversations would dip to a murmur when he sat down, then resume with a strained artificial casualness. He ceased to just be another mechanic on Kessler and became the human. One afternoon, a young Gruvek technician, still a hatchling, dropped a heavy grav spanner near Nate's foot. The tool clanged on the deck plates. The young Gruvek flinched back, his frills flattened, an expression of primal terror on his face as if Nate himself were a source of sudden, dangerous energy. Nate just bent down, picked up the spanner, and handed it back to him. "Careful with this," he said. "It'll take your toes off if it lands wrong." The technician stared at him, wide-eyed, before snatching the tool and scrambling away in silence. Nate stood there for a long moment, the spanner's ghost weight still in his hand. He had always been an outsider. Now he was becoming a monster, a cryptid in his own life. His simplest actions now held the weight of terrifying power. He wanted only to be invisible. Instead, he was the most visible being on the station. The summons came on a standard data wafer, delivered by a silent floating drone. The wafer held an invitation, phrased more like a command, to meet with a Vorian Consortium representative. Nate's first instinct was to delete it. His work lay outside the Vorians' usual interests, but ignoring a summons from the Consortium was a reliable way to have one's work contract terminated. The office occupied a space in the pristine corporate sector of Kessler, a world away from the engineering deck's grit and grease. Scrubbers kept the air free of all scent. A Vorian named Varen greeted him. He was tall and thin, with a large gray head. A sharp, tailored suit encased his form. Every gesture was minimal, serving a direct purpose.
Mr. Romero,
Varen said, his voice a dry, toneless hum. He began speaking immediately.
thank you for your punctuality. Please, have a seat.
The chair's design, meant for a Vorian's anatomy, forced him into an awkward posture. Nate perched on the edge of it, feeling out of place in his stained work jumpsuit. Varen brought up a holographic display between them. It showed a planet orbiting a volatile star of brilliant blue. The planet's surface was a blasted, sun-scorched wasteland. Data scrolled rapidly beside the image. Extreme radiation levels, atmospheric particle decay, thermal spikes.
This is Soria X1A,
Varen stated.
As you can see, the compact currently classifies it as uninhabitable. The primary obstacle to resource extraction is the prohibitive cost of radiation shielding for both personnel and equipment.
Nate stared at the display. He felt a coldness spread from his gut.
Our analysts have been monitoring anecdotal data streams originating from this station.
Varen continued, his large, ink-dark eyes fixed on Nate.
Specifically, data concerning your species' unique biological tolerances. The information, if accurate, represents a significant paradigm shift in our risk-benefit analysis for operations in so-called death zones.
He swiped a finger across the display, and a contract appeared, shimmering in the air. The numbers on it were staggering, enough to pay for his sister's schooling 12 times over.
The Vorian Consortium would like to offer you a consulting position. We want you to lead a survey team to Scoria X1A. Your presence would allow us to test the viability of reduced-cost shielding and environmental suits. Your species' biological tolerance for radiation could reduce our operational expenditures by a significant margin. You would be an invaluable asset.
An asset, a tool to increase a profit margin. Nate looked from the astronomical sum on the contract to Varen's placid face. He thought of the beach on Ridian 5, the sun on his skin. That had been his choice. A moment of calculated risk taken for a feeling of home. This was a request to walk into a furnace because his biology made him cheap labor. Thank you for the offer, Mr. Varen, Nate said, his voice polite but firm. I must decline. Varen tilted his head a fraction of a degree.
I may have been unclear regarding the compensation package.
You were clear, Nate interrupted. The answer is no. I'm a mechanic. That's all. Have a good day. He stood up and walked out of the sterile, silent office, leaving Varen staring at the contract, his placid features still, suggesting a deep confusion. He had presented an optimal, profitable course of action, and the asset had refused. The outcome was illogical, an error Varen was conditioned to correct. Chi-Chi had seen the consortium drone deliver the summons to Nate's workshop. After seeing the drone and watching him walk toward the corporate sector with his shoulders bowed in a resignation she was beginning to recognize, she had waited, lurking in a nearby corridor, a cold knot of guilt in her gut. When Nate emerged from Varen's office, the drained look on his face confirmed her fears. He looked as if some vital part of him had been cataloged, appraised, and tagged for acquisition. She scurried to catch up with him, her claws clicking nervously on the deck.
Nate, what did he want?
Nate kept his pace steady, his gaze fixed on the far end of the corridor as if the grease-stained familiarity of the engineering decks was a safe harbor. He wanted to offer me a job, as a radiation sponge on some burnt-out rock. Chi-Chi stopped in her tracks. Her frills drooped, and her vibrant scales seemed to lose their luster.
This is my fault,
she whispered, her voice choked.
I was just curious. I never considered that someone would try to use it, to use you.
Nate stopped and turned to face her. Anguish filled her golden eyes. Her body coiled with tension. His own anger eased. She was different from Varen, different from the whispering crew members. Just a kid who had followed a thread of data, unaware of the predator waiting at the end of it. "Hey," he said, his voice gentle. "It's not your fault. You read the data, you didn't create it. If it wasn't you, it would have been someone else eventually." He offered her a small, tired smile. "It's okay." I said no. It's over.
It's not, is it?
She countered, already calculating the next move.
Avorion accepts no, only when profit is futile. He'll go to your superiors. He'll find another way to apply pressure.
She was right. The quiet life Nate wanted was gone. "So we'll figure it out," Nate said, and the word "we" hung in the air between them, solid and real. For the first time in days, a flicker of partnership sparked between them. Chi-Chi's frills perked up slightly. Resolve replaced the guilt on her face. This was more than a theoretical problem. She had a friend to protect. They found their sanctuary in a place the station's crew had long forgotten. A decommissioned storage hold on one of the station's oldest, most secluded sublevels. The air was stale and dusty, and the only light came from a single flickering maintenance panel. Surrounded by forgotten crates and obsolete machinery, they could speak freely. Nate settled onto a large rusted container, the metal groaning under his weight. Chi-Chi paced back and forth in the narrow space, her restless energy filling the small room.
There has to be a way to make them stop,
she said, thinking aloud.
We could file a harassment complaint with the station administration.
Nate shook his head. Against the Vorian Consortium, we're a mechanic and an apprentice trader. They're a major freight mover in the sector. They would dismiss our complaint before we finished filing it. He fell silent, staring at the dusty floor. His skills were for repair, a world away from fighting battles. He'd taken this job, this life so far from home, for a simple reason. I have a sister, he said, the words feeling strange after he had kept them inside for so long. Mia. She's smarter than I'll ever be. Wants to be a planetary botanist. The tuition for the university on Proxima Centauri is substantial. He looked up at Chi-Chi, his expression open and earnest. That's all this is about for me. I do my job, I send the credits home, she gets to study weird alien plants. That's the whole plan. The plan accounted for engine repairs and tuition payments. It excluded becoming a corporate asset or a biological wonder. He leaned back, resting his head against the cold bulkhead. You know what I was thinking about on the beach on Ridian 5? Our parents would take us to the coast in the summer. The sun on your skin after you get out of the cold water, it's like plunging into a power source. It feels like home. He gave a short, humorless laugh. It's funny. The thing that makes me human, the connection to my star, it's what's making everyone here treat me as something other than a human. Chi-Chi stopped pacing. She looked at Nate, at this quiet, competent man whose greatest wish was to provide for his family and remember the warmth of his home. Complex ties of clan and commerce bound her people, the Gruvek. But she understood loyalty and the fierce protective bond of family. In this dusty, forgotten corner of the station, the data point and biological anomaly dissolved, revealing Nate as a person. And she saw the stakes were higher than she had ever imagined. They were fighting for his privacy and for his definition of home. The second summons arrived with two imposing Cygnian soldiers, their armor polished under the corridor lights. They stood in silence in Nate's doorway until he got the message. Commander Veilrax's office was the polar opposite of Varen's. Where the Vorian space was sterile and corporate, the Cygnian's was brutally Spartan. The office contained only a metal desk and a chair for her, and a designated spot on the floor for Nate to stand. The only scent was the faint, sharp smell of static that clung to the Cygnian species. Veilrax herself was an imposing figure. Taller than a human, her form was a collection of hard angles and hardened plates of dark polished armor. She moved with an unnerving stillness, and she took in everything at once with her wide, lens-like eyes. When she spoke, a small device on her desk instantly translated her voice, a series of calm, definite clicks and modulated tones.
Nate Romero.
The translator intoned, the voice as flat as Valrax's gaze.
I have reviewed the data regarding your species' environmental tolerances. It presents several tactical considerations.
She began the assessment immediately.
We require clarification on several points,
she continued, and she tilted her head slightly.
What is the standard healing rate for second-degree thermal and radiation burns on your epidermis?
Nate stared at her, dumbfounded. I don't know. A few weeks?
Define a few weeks in standard station days.
Valrax pressed, a stylus tapping rhythmically on her desk.
Unacceptable variance. We require definite data. Next question. What is the psychological response of a human to prolonged environmental stress in a known hazardous zone? Is there a point of systemic failure? Does morale degrade at a quantifiable rate?
The questions kept coming, each one colder and more analytical than the last. She asked about cellular degradation under duress, pain tolerance thresholds, the efficiency of human DNA self-repair mechanisms under sustained particle bombardment. She was cataloging the specifications of a piece of military hardware. Varen had wanted to use his body to save money. Valrax was contemplating using it as a weapon. His resilience was a strategic advantage. A soldier who could operate in a radioactive hot zone without cumbersome shielding was a paradigm shift in ground warfare.
Is it true,
and her wide, lens-like eyes seemed to dissect him layer by layer,
that your species has historically engaged in warfare in environments you knew were damaging to your own biology and did so willingly?
Nate thought of the old stories, the histories of Earth's brutal, pointless wars. Yes, he whispered. Commander Valrax made a final notation on her terminal.
The potential for a high-endurance, low-maintenance biological asset is significant. We will require your cooperation in further testing. That is all.
She dismissed him. Nate walked out of the Spartan office, his body trembling. He felt plundered, as if they had looked at the essence of what allowed him to live and breathe and had seen only its utility. He was a resource to be exploited, a weapon to be sharpened. The walls of Kessler Station, once a symbol of his quiet, independent life, were beginning to feel like the walls of a cage. Back in the cramped silence of his quarters, Nate felt the full weight of his situation settled on him. The station's life support system's hum, usually a comforting background noise, now sounded like the breathing of a great beast that had him in its jaws. The consortium and the Cygnian military had trapped him. On one side, a corporation saw him as a cost-saving measure. On the other, a military power saw him as a prototype for a new kind of soldier. Both were utterly convinced of their right to claim him. His identity, Nate Romero, mechanic, brother, a quiet man who liked the sun's feeling, was being stripped away, replaced by a label, the human asset. He paced the small room, 4 steps one way, 4 steps back, and he clenched his hands into fists. A desperate primal urge to flee rose in him, to run until he found a place where his biology held no special significance, where he could just be another face in the crowd. He slumped into the chair at his small personal terminal. The easy life he had sought had vanished. Kessler had become a prison, its bars forged from others' expectations. The Vorian consortium and the Cygnian military were monoliths far beyond his ability to fight. But he was a mechanic. He solved problems by understanding the system, by finding the weak points, the worn-out seals, the faulty relays. He knew how to make things go, and he knew how to make things stop. His mind, accustomed to tracing complex power conduits and diagnostic flowcharts, searched for a different kind of schematic. He accessed the station's personnel network, the interface clunky and bureaucratic. He searched for transfer protocols, filtering by sector, by job description, by station population. He typed in keywords: quiet, isolated, low traffic. He was searching for a place of such low strategic value that no corporation or military would ever take notice. A place of anonymity, a place to disappear. Chi-Chi, true to her word, worked the problem from her own angle. While Nate searched for a destination, she cleared the path. As a trader, her life was a web of contacts, cargo schedules, personal manifests, and bureaucratic networks. She knew how to find things that were meant to remain unfound, and how to navigate the Galactic Compact's labyrinthine regulations. She dove into the station's deep networks, far beyond the public database. She cross-referenced low-priority cargo routes with personnel requisitions that had been open for months, even years. She was looking for a forgotten corner of the galaxy, a dead-end job that was perpetually vacant, and she found it. It was a single, low-priority opening for a Class 3 maintenance technician on the TR-77 communications relay in the Eridanus Deep Sector. The sector was a vast, sparsely populated expanse of old, dim stars and vast stretches of void. The relay station was a lonely, automated outpost responsible for boosting hyperwave signals across the empty gulf of space. The job required a single technician to perform routine maintenance and diagnostics. The tour of duty was 3 standard years. The station's population was 1. It was perfect. It was a humble, isolated posting and so far from any strategic or commercial interest that it was practically invisible. It was the bureaucratic equivalent of a forgotten storage closet. It was the anonymity Nate craved. She brought the information to him, her terminal glowing in the dim light of their secret meeting place.
"It's not much," she said, her voice soft. "It would be a lonely posting."
Nate looked at the requisition form, at the stark, simple description of the job. The isolation was a promise, a virtue. A place free of crowds, far from corporations, beyond the reach of the militaries. Just him, the quiet hum of machinery, and the endless peaceful silence of deep space. "It's perfect," he said, a genuine smile touching his lips for the first time in weeks. "It's exactly what I need." With a renewed sense of hope, Nate compiled the necessary forms and officially submitted his transfer request through the Kessler Personnel Network. He cited his qualifications, his years of service, and a desire for a work environment with lighter duties as he neared the later stages of his career, a small believable fiction. He hit the submit button. A path out. Less than an hour later, a notification chimed on his terminal. He opened it, expecting a standard automated confirmation. Instead, a stark red banner met him across the screen. Transfer request denied. Beneath the denial, in a smaller print, was the explanation. His personnel file had been flagged. Varen and Valrax had attached 2 separate special interest notices to it, barring any change in his station or duty assignment until it received the direct approval of the flagging authorities. Varen had filed the first, citing ongoing corporate consultation. Commander Valrax had filed the second, citing strategic skills assessment. The bureaucratic walls had slammed shut. The path was blocked. Varen and Valrax had anticipated his move. They had used the system designed to manage personnel to turn him into property. They had locked him down, an asset to be held in place until they decided how best to make use of him. The relief he had felt moments before curdled into cold despair. He was well and truly caged. Chi-Chi was in the middle of a frustrating negotiation. She was trying to acquire a shipment of high-grade tellurium capacitors for her clan, but her supplier, a stubborn grummock known for his intransigence, held firm on the price. He had a monopoly on the station's supply, and he knew it. She had argued with him directly, but his position was rigid. Frustrated, she took a break, pacing the bustling trade floor. Her mind, however, kept working the problem. With the boulder immovable, she had to find a way around it. She scanned the public trade boards, her brain processing hundreds of listings a minute. Her search shifted from tellurium capacitors to leverage, and she found it. A surplus listing, A massive shipment of refined beryllium-gallium alloy had just arrived on the station, flooding the market. It was a common component, but she happened to know from a previous deal that her stubborn Grummock supplier's primary buyer was an FTL drive casing manufacturer, and those casing required that exact alloy. An idea sparked, a sideways solution. She stopped arguing with the Grummock. Instead, she contacted the seller of the beryllium-gallium, bought up a significant portion of the surplus at a low price, and then approached the FTL drive manufacturer. She offered them the alloy at a rate that significantly undercut the Grummock's usual supplier. The manufacturer, always looking to cut costs, eagerly accepted. A few hours later, she received a furious message from the Grummock. His biggest customer had just canceled their long-term contract. He was now sitting on a massive inventory of capacitors that were now difficult to move. 20 minutes after that, Chi-Chi received a new offer from him for the beryllium capacitors. The price was now miraculously reasonable. As she finalized the three-way trade, a triumphant grin spread across her face. She had changed the variables. She had introduced a new piece of data into the system that made her original obstacle obsolete. She looked at the finalized trade confirmation, and a path forward for Nate appeared. A direct fight against Varen's hold or Valrax's flag was futile. They were boulders. But what if the asset they were so determined to hold on to seemed flawed? What if the valuable commodity developed a defect? The Kessler Station medbay was quiet, the air tinged with the faint scent of antiseptic. The medic on duty was a gentle, elderly Sylvan named Lear, whose calm demeanor and long, triple-jointed fingers made him a highly trusted medical professional on the station. Nate had been to see him once before for a minor plasma burn, and Lear had treated him with a calm professionalism that was a welcome relief from the recent awe and fear he'd been facing. Nate sat on the edge of a diagnostic bed explaining his symptoms. The stress was genuine. It etched itself on his face and the tired lines around his eyes. He told Lear about the pressure, the constant feeling of being watched, the difficulty sleeping. "I'm losing focus," Nate explained, his voice low and earnest. "In the engine bay, focus is essential. One wrong move, one decimal point in the wrong place on a calibration, and things go bad. Fast. My hands have started shaking just a little. I'm worried." Lear listened patiently, running a soft, glowing scanner over Nate's head. The Sylvan studied him with large, empathetic eyes.
Your synaptic activity shows elevated cortisol levels and fatigue. You are, to use a human term, severely stressed.
"There's a thing," Nate said, choosing his words with care. "It's a rare human condition. I've read about it. Chronic environmental dissociation syndrome. It can happen to humans who spend too much time away from a star like their own. Neurological stuff, lots of fine motor control, impaired judgment. They say stress makes it worse." Lear tilted his head, assessing the medical database. He found one condition, rare, lacking extensive study, but officially documented. Its primary symptoms matched Nate's description perfectly. The unique nature of human biology, which the entire station was now gossiping about, made a unique neurological condition tied to their home environment entirely plausible. The Sylvan looked from his database back to the tired human sitting in front of him. Before him sat a man under immense pressure, seeking a way out. His purpose was healing. Administration was another's concern. His duty was to his patient.
Your self-diagnosis appears consistent with the available data and my own readings,
Lear said, his voice gentle. He made a notation on Nate's official medical file.
Diagnosis: early onset chronic environmental dissociation syndrome. Symptoms include minor neurological degradation, loss of fine motor control, and impaired focus. The condition is known to be exacerbated by high-stress environments. Recommend transfer to a low-stress, low-stimulus environment for patient well-being.
The flawed data had been introduced into the system. With the medical diagnosis officially in Nate's file, Chi-Chi went to work. The frantic apprentice gave way to a master strategist, subtly sowing the seeds of doubt. Her first target was Varen's assistant, a nervous, career-climbing Vorian named Rel. She accidentally ran into him near the corporate sector's energy gel dispensary. She put on a masterful performance of concern, her voice hushed and worried.
Rel, I hope I'm not overstepping, but I heard about Nate Romero's diagnosis.
She began, her frills drooping sadly.
The chronic environmental dissociation syndrome. It's just terrible. I'm so worried for him.
Rel, who had heard nothing of this, immediately focused on the new data.
Diagnosis? What diagnosis?
Oh, you didn't know.
Chi-Chi feigned surprise.
It's in his medical file, some kind of neurological degradation. Apparently his fine motor skills are starting to go. It's a tragedy. Of course, I'm sure it won't affect the consortium's project. I mean, what are the odds that an asset with a progressive neurological disorder would adversely affect a high-risk, long-term colonization initiative? The potential for unforeseen complications must be statistically negligible.
Rel's large, ink-dark eyes widened slightly. The gears of risk assessment were turning in his corporate mind. An unstable asset was a liability. A long-term project built around a liability was a bad investment. He scurried away, already composing a memo for Varen. Her next move was even more subtle. She had a contact in the station's logistics department, a talkative Grashed, who sometimes supplied her with shipping schedules. She knew he often shared drinks with some of Commander Valrax's junior officers. Over a casual conversation about incoming military supplies, she steered the topic to personnel readiness.
It's a shame about the human mechanic,
she sighed, shaking her head.
Such a unique biology, but so high maintenance. I hear their nerves start to fray in anything other than those stress environments, prone to something called disassociation. Makes them unreliable for versatile deployment, I'd imagine. You can't build a strategy around a soldier who might lose focus at a critical moment. It's a logistical nightmare.
She knew the word nightmare was an exaggeration, but she had chosen the word logistical perfectly. To the hyper-efficient Cygnian military, a logistical complication was a cardinal sin. An unreliable unit was worse than a weak one. The information, couched in the language of efficiency and reliability, would find its way to Commander Valrax. The perfect weapon came with a fatal design flaw. Nate's final move was his most direct, yet he cloaked it in the simple, undeniable language of safety. He requested a formal meeting with the Kessler Station administrator, a stern but fair Bjornian woman named Tella. He entered her office as a concerned employee, forgoing grievances or accusations against Varen or Valrax. His official medical file had already been transmitted to her desk ahead of the meeting. He held a terminal in his hands, which trembled just enough to be noticeable. "Administrator Tella, thank you for seeing me," he began, his voice laced with a measured weariness. "I'm here about a safety concern. As you can see from my medical file, I have been diagnosed with the early stages of chronic environmental dissociation syndrome." Tella nodded, and her paired sets of eyes blinked slowly as she scanned the file on her own console.
"I've read the medic's report, Mr. Romero. Continue."
"My primary duties in the main engine bay, often working directly with the plasma injector core and the FTL capacitor regulators," Nate said, keeping his explanation technical and professional. "These systems require definite calibrations. A single misplaced digit in the energy flow calibration can lead to a catastrophic overload. Lately, due to my documented medical condition, I've been having trouble with my focus. My hands, their steadiness has diminished." He held out his hand, and whether from nerves or acting, it had a slight but visible tremor. "I can no longer, in good conscience, guarantee that I can perform my duties to the required safety specifications," he concluded, his voice filled with the regret of a veteran professional. "I am becoming a safety risk to this station. For the well-being of the crew and the operational integrity of Kessler, I have to request a transfer to a less critical, low-stress position. The one on the TR-77 relay seems appropriate." He made himself the problem. His own medically documented struggle to safely do his job was the issue. Setting aside Varen's ambition or Valrax's strategy, he was a faulty component, requesting a move to a station of the machine where his failure would have minimal systemic impact. He had appealed to the one thing more powerful than corporate greed or military ambition. bureaucratic liability. Administrator Tella was, above all else, a pragmatist. Her job was to keep Kessler's station running safely and efficiently. She looked at the situation with the cool logic of a systems manager. On one hand, she had two powerful station residents, the Vorian Consortium and the Cygnian military, who had flagged an employee as a person of interest. On the other hand, she had the same employee, a senior mechanic with a flawless record, who now carried an official medical diagnosis, making him a quantifiable safety risk in one of the station's most critical areas. The station's own medic had recommended a transfer. The employee himself was citing safety protocols. The potential profit Varen might gain and the potential strategic advantage Valrax might acquire were abstract future possibilities. A plasma injector overload was a concrete, immediate disaster that would fall directly under her responsibility. She sent 2 notifications, one to Varen and one to Commander Valrax. The message was brief and clinical.
Pursuant to Kessler Station Safety Regulation 9.4a,
It read,
personnel with documented medical conditions that may impair performance in critical duty roles must be reassigned. Mechanic Nate Romero is medically unfit for his current duties in the engine bay. Furthermore, his diagnosis makes him unsuitable for high-stress projects proposed by your departments. For reasons of operational safety and liability mitigation, your special interest holds have been overridden. His transfer to a non-critical post has been approved effective immediately.
It was an administrative decision, backed by the full weight of station law. The decision was final. Faced with a safety and liability issue, Varen and Valrax were forced to withdraw their claims. Their valuable asset was now, officially, damaged goods. In the dusty storage hold, Nate and Chi-Chi read the confirmation message on her terminal. They acknowledged their victory with a profound shared silence of relief. It was a small, quiet victory, one with paperwork, persistence, and a little sideways thinking. Months later, the only sound was the gentle rhythmic hum of the TR-77 communications relay. It was a vast, silent machine hanging in the Iridianus Deep Sector's void, and Nate Romero was its sole keeper. His life was a simple, repeating pattern of diagnostic checks, system calibrations, and long, peaceful silences. The stars here were old and dim, and the emptiness between them was vast and comforting. He had been the sole living occupant since his arrival, and he had never felt more at peace. A soft chime from his personal terminal echoed in the control room's quiet, a new message. He opened it. The sender ID was Chi-Chi. Her message was a long one, full of her characteristic energy even in text. She told him her clan had been so impressed with her success with the tellurium deal and her novel approach to interspecies problems that they had promoted her. She was now a junior trade liaison assigned to a new route serviced by a human-crewed freighter, the Odyssey's End.
They are fascinating, she wrote. They make jokes whose meaning escapes me and eat food that is terribly bland. But they are kind. My clan elders believe understanding your people's social dynamics, the way you build your crews like a clan even with strangers, is a new frontier for trade. They assigned me to learn, and I wanted to learn from your kindness in addition to your resilience.
Nate smiled as he read, a genuine, easy smile that reached his eyes. He felt a surge of pride for his young friend. The message ended with a final question.
P.S. Did your sunburn ever heal?
He leaned back in his chair and absently touched his shoulder through the fabric of his clean, unstained jumpsuit. The skin was smooth and whole. The peeling and the pain a distant memory. The relay station's quiet hum was the only sound for 1,000 light years. He was alone. He was anonymous. He was home. He typed back his reply. All better. When this tour is up, the first thing I'm doing is finding a beach.